Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the broadcast this evening. Good evening, sir.
Good evening to you. Where's your tie?
I was looking for a bow tie the same color as yours, but I didn't have one as just as nice as yours. So
All right. Upright.
That would look funny, actually, if I come in with a tie next week. But you are tempting me, sir. You are tempting
me. Next week, you probably will come with a blue tie, and then you will start a war.
Okay. Well, it's blue. So let's see how that goes. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, thank you.
Fantastic. And thank you to our viewers, as usual, for joining. Please don't forget, share the link. There are quite a lot of things we're going to talk about this evening. But, sir, let's start with Russia. For the first time, we're seeing the UN General Assembly has voted to remove Russia as a member of the Human Rights Council. How significant is that, sir?
Look, when you look at the trajectory of the debates within the UN since this war started, it's not really terribly significant in the sense that once the resolution was tabled, it was expected that it will pass. However, it's not as significant as it could possibly be, in the sense that why not for the technicality of the voting system of the United Nations General Assembly, actually the resolution will not have passed, in the sense that you needed 2/3 majority for the resolution to be passed. But it is 2/3 of those present and voting, which means 2/3 of a combination of yes and no votes. Abstention did not count, and 58 members abstained, while 93 voted yes. If it were to be 2/3 of those present voting, including abstentions, it wouldn't have passed. Up till now, the majority used to be around 120 something, and so on. So one was expecting that the majority also will reflect the voting pattern of the past. But now there's been, if you like, diminishing returns in terms of condemnation of Russia, if you want to put it that way. But nevertheless, suspension is still suspension. Russia stood condemned as of this afternoon by, again, the United Nations General Assembly. And in this case, the condemnation carried a penalty, which was suspension from membership of the United Nations Human Rights Council.
Thank you, sir. Still looking at Russia, Ukraine, one of the pictures that caught the world, maybe not quite by surprise, but has definitely drawn condemnation towards Russia has been the scenes of the mass graves and of the killings that we've seen in Bucha in Ukraine, and the claims that the Russian soldiers did this on their way out. How do you react to those barbaric acts that we've seen there, sir?
I felt aghast, like everyone else. Let us forget all this misinformation and disinformation and what have you that the Russians tried to come up with about how those things were state managed. In fact, some of them were so gruesome. I couldn't even look at them. And you've had eyewitness reports in one or two cases by priests. And when you listened to the nature of the report by the priest, you will know this was not state managed, this was not arranged. He didn't say, I mean, if he was acting, of course, you would have said, oh, yes, no, they lined all of them up, men, women, children, everybody, they were shooting that kind of dramatic presentation. The priest said, I had to negotiate with the Russian soldiers to please let me bury these people. Some of them died naturally. Some of them died in the process of the fighting. He never said anything about, being lined up or that kind of thing. So there's no doubt in my mind that what we witnessed should never. I know war is brutal. There's no doubt about it. Let us, in fact, thank God we are seeing war not through the lenses of Hollywood or whichever wood makes films these days. So that all this, looking at soldiers with hips on their shoulder, braids, when they're wearing their ceremonial uniform, they do look, like you want to join them. No. This is the brutality. This is the reality of war. And we are being allowed to say war for what war is. Don't let me say I'm surprised, because I've never been involved in any war with the Russians. I've never been involved in war with anybody, so I don't know how soldiers behave when confronted with the reality of bullets and what have you. But what I have seen, I think, does not do Russia any credit at all. It doesn't. What more can I say? What more can I say? The brutality is obvious. It doesn't, I can't find words. Honestly, there are times you are short of words. Not because you can't think of all the adjectives or all the adverbs, but simply because nothing, no word that you can do, that you can think of, will do credit to what has happened in Ukraine, for which Russian troops have been accused.
So there is a lot of people have started to refer to what's happening by the Russians. They've called it genocide. I think the UK Prime Minister inclusive, almost linking it to genocide. But there is a development that's come out recently, just this week as well, that talked about a group in one of the militias we had in Darfur, and the fact that he's now within the International Criminal Court. He's going through a trial for genocide and deaths like this. Do you think that Putin could ever face a similar sort of trial at the ICC?
No. No. Leaders of superpowers and even powers that are not that super, but who are allies of superpowers, don't end up before the International Criminal Court or specialized courts, because there were some specialized courts set up after the Yugoslavian Civil War. And I believe also there might have been after the Rwandan Civil War. But leaders and generals of superpowers don't turn up before these courts. And this is one of the, what I would regard shortcomings of the judicial system. But nevertheless, again, that's the reality. When the same International Criminal Court said it was going to investigate the activities of American troops in Iraq, the United States, hit the ceiling and decided to freeze the funds of the International Criminal Court, freeze the funds of its key officers, and that kind of thing. And in any case, the United States is not even a signatory to the Charter of the International Criminal Court. You will have to put American troops on the ground to go and arrest Putin or any of his generals before you could get them before the ICC. The same thing for Britain. There were charges also leveled against British troops in Iraq, and of course, it was all handled as an in-house affair. Task forces were set up within Britain itself, and the verdict came back that no, I don't think they found anybody guilty of anything, which was to be expected. But you are not going to line up Tony Blair before the ICC or anything of the sort. So you are not going to get Putin, as I said, or the foreign minister or what have you before the ICC. Now, there are a few things we can think of, and I can briefly mention them, even though they are not going to get anywhere. We could have the same UN General Assembly that had been used as a reliable pair of hands since this war started. A resolution could be taken there and ask that nations can be prosecuted for all that is worth before the ICC, or a special court set up to prosecute Russia before a special court on the Ukrainian war, which would be a novelty, all right, in international humanitarian law. That technically could happen. However, surprisingly, China will be opposed to it for obvious reasons, because before the war started on Ukraine, don't forget that the Americans were going after China for treatment of its some of its citizens who were Asian and who were Muslim. The United States, surprisingly, also will be opposed to it, because when you have a presence in several parts of the world, there is always a danger that your troops may wittingly or unwittingly get involved in some activities that may prove embarrassing to you, and to which you can then be dragged using the special provision of nations being tried before a court system. So the US will also be opposed to it. Britain will be opposed to it. France will be opposed to it. So it's not really only Russia that will be opposed to it. There are ad hoc measures like that that can be used, but as I said, it's and this is the point that not only the president of Ukraine, but even Cyril Ramaphosa was talking about in his own statement to his own parliament about the restructuring that is necessary to do about the Security Council of the United Nations, that it should not be possible for one nation to be able to use its vote to stop action by that body. However, you see, if you go into the genesis of the veto system, is to stop the United Nations making a fool of itself. In the sense that, and we've just seen it, when Ukraine asks for air cover, and Biden, another NATO leader, said, NATO providing an air cover for Ukraine is going to bring NATO into direct conflict and confrontation with Russia. And that is a third world war right there and then. So the veto power or the veto provision was to prevent the United Nations declaring war against a superpower. Actually, what independent troops does the United Nations have? None. It depends on troops of its member states. So it's like that famous saying by Stalin when he was told, be careful, this will upset the Pope. And he said, how many divisions does the Pope have? So to prevent the UN passing resolutions that it cannot implement, that's why you have the veto power. If it didn't exist, it will have to be invented. So I don't see the shortcoming, I mean, the top and bottom of it is, I don't see all these accusations, which are grievous, I mean, a time may come, who knows, 50 years, 100 years from now, if I were a Russian, I wouldn't want it to be a blot on my national symbol that we have been accused of committing genocide in Ukraine, or Chechnya or Syria or anywhere, for that matter.
One key point that sticks out with this conflict, sir, when we compare this to Syria that you just mentioned, sir, President Obama was clear about a red line. If you cross this red line, then we're going to intervene. And it seemed at the time, Syria crossed the so-called red line, and we didn't quite get the response that we thought we were going to get. The response from President Obama was open to interpretation. Now, when we look at Ukraine and Russia, we're seeing all these images of the atrocities that are being committed. Now we're saying, well, when you use chemical weapons, it's going to be a red line. When exactly, sir, should the Western world start to say, this is going too far, we need to do something stronger to try to stop this from happening? What is that red line? And have they crossed it?
I thought that all the body language and policy declarations, emphasis by NATO, which really represents the West, all indicate we don't want to start a war with Russia. We don't want a world war, a third world war. That is what setting a red line and crossing it will be. Are you prepared for a third world war? That's the question that you must continue to ask yourself. Are we prepared for a third world war? It's unfortunate that Ukraine has to be in the firing line. And I hope this is a lesson to the global South countries, who, in a way, it should be a lesson that no matter how righteous your cause is, unless you have the wherewithal and the means to defend yourself and take on a superpower, which is what this is, then look for ways and means of minimizing your losses. Nobody is going to go to war on your behalf if that war is going to mean the possibility of a world war. Nobody. Get that very clear in your mind. What they will do, what superpowers do, and I'm sure the Americans are now doing it, and NATO countries are now doing it, is they will be giving you weapons, sufficient weapons to deliver deadly blows at the enemy, but not weapons sufficient for you to trigger off even a world war on your part. There's no doubt in my mind that there are things that the United States Special Forces and NATO Special Forces are doing in Ukraine that they are not telling us. So that even for the Russians, there will be no red line that NATO will have crossed. I am sure it is going on. If it isn't going on, Biden should be charged for dereliction of duty. But outright confrontation, declaration of a red line, and then saying, yes, you've crossed that line, we're gonna go in. No, they've told you enough. At every conference they have heard that there will be no declared, I'm starting to modify it now with my own language, there will be no openly declared NATO troops, NATO boots on the ground in Ukraine. I am sure they are there, but just that they are not declared. I am sure they are there. They probably will be called technical advisors, technical assistants. They are helping to train on this and that and what have you. Because you've also got to provide Putin with some face-saving measures so that he doesn't feel, well, you've challenged me to a fight and I've got to take you on. Right now, because all this we're pulling back because we want to re-strategize and reorganize in other parts, is because his troops are taking heavy losses that he didn't expect. And so he's saying that they need to, re-strategize. Something happened which, again, I want to draw our attention to. There's been now a change in phraseology by NATO. The meeting of foreign ministers of NATO was now declared meeting of foreign ministers of NATO and its allies. And its allies now end up being foreign minister of New Zealand, foreign minister of Japan, foreign minister of Australia were there. And NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is starting to reinvent itself as NATO and Pacific friends or Pacific allies or Pacific whatever it is. But it's letting you know that now China is within its telescope. It's no longer just Russia. China is now within its telescope. Now, NATO has just been criticized, and I quite agree with Cyril Ramaphosa on this, that this war will not have happened if NATO has listened to its own strategic thinkers who told it that expanding the remit of NATO eastward to incorporate former countries that were members of the Soviet Union will eventually lead to blood and tears. And they didn't listen. This was in the 90s. People like Kissinger, people like Schlesinger, they were there warning, and they were ignored. Now, you've seen the disaster that is happening in Europe because you didn't listen to your strategic thinkers. You now want to spread your remit to the Pacific, to now cross. We talk about red lines all the time. Thank God they don't call it black lines. We are not involved in this. You now want to stretch your remit, extend your remit to the Pacific. and start talking about red lines there with China. I thought that the United States actually has learned its lesson in the Korean War when it came face to face with the Chinese. They lost. Yes, South Korea, the foreign minister of South Korea was also at this meeting. So but then we have spoken on this platform several times about the chessboard of a new world order. And here we go, now we are starting to see pieces being brought out of the bag and people are testing the waters. So it's we are a long way from seeing a settled world. We're a long way. But before we leave this, please, there's one other issue I want to draw attention to. A video surfaced today of what is purported to be Ukrainian troops executing Russian prisoners of war that they captured. Yeah, that also is very disturbing. And I will not try to justify this kind of thing. But again, I must repeat, this is war. Soldiers are human beings. I hope this is a lesson to all of us, but especially Russia. If you perpetrate atrocity, you could trigger off retaliation, even if it's only momentary loss of control by the opposite side. Or maybe haven't come across several bodies like what they've been showing us, confronted now with Russian troops that they have captured, will simply lose control. And the immediate human reaction will be to take revenge. It was covered up. It's just recently you will come across a book here or a book there or a witness report here and there that actually the Allied forces, when they went into Germany, haven't seen the concentration, what the Germans did in the concentration camps, that actually a few of the units lost control and really mowed down German troops that they found, and it took the disciplined officer corps of their officers to bring things under control. Simply because you're human, you're not machine. You've just seen human beings you couldn't even identify as human beings. They were like matchsticks, hundreds, thousands of them. I say, you people did this to other human beings, and you're now holding up your hands that you are surrendering. No. But if you have a very strong, disciplined officer corps, it will immediately, especially, I'm not talking about the generals, I'm talking about the sergeants, the corporals, lieutenant colonels, majors. These are people who bring troops under control before things, really fall apart. So I'm not excusing the Ukrainians. I'm not justifying them. But at the same time, I am not surprised that we are going to be seeing more and more of these things.
Sir, I want to pull out 2 points you raised there, sir. In terms of NATO, expanding to bring in foreign ministers from Japan, New Zealand, and some of the other countries there. And also South Korea. But let's deal with the New Zealand axis first. And that is some time ago, we talked about the AUKUS deal that had been signed and the fact that US, UK, Australia came together to form this new body separate from NATO. Now what we're seeing again, sir, is another announcement saying that there was going to be some collaboration between the United States, UK, and Australia in the development of hypersonic missiles. Oh, how do you react to the timing of this further announcement, sir? That's the first one in terms of New Zealand. And then the second one, sir, in terms of South Korea, is that the president-elect has called on the United States to bring nuclear weapons and come and station them in that area. So speaking to those two axes that you pulled out, sir, what do you think about the timing of this additional pact on hypersonic missiles? And secondly, on the timing of South Korea asking for nuclear weapons to be brought to their shores?
I'm not surprised by these developments. Actually, again on this platform, I had asked a rhetorical question that if Ukraine had not given nuclear weapons when it became independent, do you think that Russia would have invaded Ukraine? And the answer is no. So things are happening in other parts of the world as part of the lessons of the Ukrainian-Russian war or Russian-Ukrainian war. There was a time, I think I was a postgraduate student at Oxford at that time, when anti-nuclear strategy, anti-nuclear weapons was the in thing that we students know. Every weekend we go to and demonstrate against possession of nuclear weapons and labeled Americans, all sorts of names, forcing them to try to withdraw their nuclear weapons, stationed in some other parts of the world. Now, confronted with the rising giant in Asia, people are starting to think, well, look at what is happening to Ukraine. If we don't have nuclear weapons as a shield, not as a sword, it will be a defensive mechanism. We may have Ukraine done to us. So the same South Korea that used to have hundreds, thousands of students every weekend demonstrate, when nations demonstrate, they do demonstrate. For calling on America to withdraw not only nuclear weapons, but also their troops from their soil. They are starting to sing a different tune because they don't want to lose their sovereignty. They don't want to lose their territorial integrity. And don't forget that North Korea is or will be a nuclear power. It cannot be stopped. So South Korea has got to modernize its own security strategy in order to take cognizance of that. The same thing is going to happen, I'm afraid, in New Zealand and Australia. because where they are going to draw that line in the Pacific is going to be problematic for everyone involved. But I can see that line being drawn where on one side will be Korea, South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan. And on the other side of the line will be New Zealand and Australia. It's going to be a racial thing. Let's call it spade by its real name. It's going to be a racial thing, a racial division where China will be claiming that actually the Pacific is for Asians and New Zealand and Australia are European outposts in the Pacific. And how they are then going to work that out, I'm not a prophet. Even though I've been promoted to apostle on this program, that's gone too far for me to speculate upon. But all these things, they are part of that jigsaw puzzle we keep talking about. They are pieces, that are going to come onto this chessboard. And some will be sacrificed, while some, like, after all, at the end of the Second World War, really, France did not deserve a seat in the Security Council of the UN, but it was negotiated and it got it. Negotiations will happen for this new world order. And that's why, again, I am not too happy that Africa is not playing its game right. It's not even addressing the issue. There is no task force by the African Union to start taking a look at this. Maybe at the end of the day, we are still expecting that Europe will speak for us, which to me will be an insult if in the 21st century we are expecting that Europe will be our interlocutor on a world scene. I will again use this opportunity. People have access to leaders, decision makers in Africa to say, this is the time for you to set up a task force to be thinking about your role and your place in the new world order.
Thank you, sir. While we're talking about Africa, sir, there is a very important point that I want to bring up. And that has to do with the announcement this week that former President Kampore will be imprisoned or has been sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder and the assassination of President Thomas Sankara. I know that around that time, you were foreign minister in Nigeria around the time. How do you think Thomas Sankara would be reacting to this verdict? And is this justice for him?
Well, I don't. I don't know how spirits react to. I haven't met one, haven't dealt with one. Thomas Sankara was not a vain person. So is us, his admirers, those of us who valued what he did in Africa, who are embracing the judgment of the court. Kampore is just a mockingbird. He's sitting in exile in Cote d'Ivoire. And so the judgment of the court was passed on him in absentia. The only power that could actually get him out of Cote d'Ivoire to come and serve his term in Burkina Faso is France. And France has some complicity in what happened to Thomas Sankara. Thomas Sankara's status as he is the Thomas Sankara of Africa, even though people say that they equate him to the Che Guevara of Africa, simply because Che Guevara has a global stature. So it's not meant to diminish Thomas Sankara's status by referring to him as the Che Guevara of Africa. It's because it helps in terms of the recognition. You are quite right. I mean, I was foreign minister in Nigeria at that time. I was close to him. There were 3 heads of states actually in Africa who they crossed the line to almost take me as an equal. Jerry Rawlings, Thomas Sankara, and Samora Machel in Mozambique. They didn't really see me as Nigerian foreign minister. They saw me as somebody who identified with his thinking and regarded me as a safe pair of hands, whether it was at ECOWAS or at OAU. It was OAU at that time meeting, and we're trying to set up, a small body to look into a particular knotty situation and find our way around it. Surprisingly, in fact, my nomination to those bodies were always coming from these people, even though they had their own foreign ministers. So you are quite right. I was devastated when he was assassinated. I tried to get Nigeria to issue a statement condemning that action, but I was overruled by my own president. And I could understand. I mean, after all, they overthrew Buhari and justified it, almost now using the same, and Kampore was now almost borrowing the language of the Nigerian government to justify what they had to do to Thomas Sankara. I welcome the judgment of the court. And I think that this court haven't done this, maybe we scholars may revisit the history of Africa and look at similar situations. Lumumba is another case that is there. Even if we are not going to be able to bring Belgium, the CIA, and whichever other bodies were involved in the assassination of Lumumba, we could set up, an AU court, to come and do justice to these African heroes. What's his name? The Emperor Haile Selassie is another one. I'm not saying everyone overthrown will merit having his case examined by this AU, African Union Court. But let us let's have a go at it. And I praise the Burkinabes for what they have done for Thomas Sankara. Hopefully, I have visited his gravesite twice. Hopefully, I'll be able to visit it one more time. Now that, justice has been done, he deserves another salute, from us.
Thank you for that, sir. Before I ask the last question here, actually there are two questions. One I can see on YouTube here, which I'll put to you in a minute. And the other one I can see here is taking us back to a question on Russia. I think you've answered this one in the past, but this person on YouTube is saying that, can the same be said of African nations with respect to the acquisition of nuclear weapons?
I mean, whoever is asking me that question does not know my history as regards the black bomb, for which I got to know, pulverized, by people, commentators at that time. I think it is obvious. Other countries, other nations are not going to give up their nuclear weapons. More and more states are acquiring the nuclear weapons. In fact, it's good that this question has been raised, because they normally talk about instability in African countries that have to do so. Now, they are just going to, maybe by the end of this week or so, remove the Prime Minister of Pakistan through a no confidence vote in Parliament. And nobody is saying that, oh, this is a nuclear power. This instability, it puts in danger, nuclear weapons in that part of the world and that kind of thing. You atomize these things. Pakistan could be having instability and terrorism in other parts of Pakistan, but again, there will be that area which you will have built a wall around that allows you to be a nuclear power, because it is in your national security interest to do so. But that a continent as big as Africa, and in fact, it is part of the attack on our mentality that the African map is drawn the way it is, that makes it look like, oh, well, it's a medium-sized continent. Actually, it isn't. You could fit the United States, China, Europe into Africa, and you will still have enough room left. Africa is not a small continent. And to think that, we've been persuaded that it is not in our national security interest to have a superpower in Africa because we cannot manage it. I mean, that's even insulting. You can't trust us to have a nuclear weapon, but it's all right. You could trust all the others. I mean, when I was a postgraduate student, these are arguments they used to make about the Chinese. Then later on about Indians and Pakistan. Yeah, these are nuclear powers now, and it hasn't led to a nuclear war. In fact, an argument can be made that being a nuclear power makes you a responsible power, because all of a sudden you are confronted with your capability. So the kind of damage even you can inflict will make you a sober person. So I haven't changed my mind. I won't change my mind on that question of nuclear weapons in Africa.
All right, sir. Let me throw a last question, and this is a legal question, sir. So former President Medvedev of Russia has, let me read his comments, sir. He said this, he said, opponents of Russia should understand that they will face a large number of cases in courts, both in the national courts of the United States and Europe and in international courts. And he was saying this while talking about all the sanctions and properties belonging to oligarchs that were being seized in different countries. How much of a challenge, sir, from a legal point of view, international law, does this actually present not only to the United States or the countries that are imposing these sanctions, but to maybe some private companies that are caught in the middle of this dilemma?
Well, you know, judges often behave as if they live on a totally different planet from this world of ours, in judgments which they often give. But there used to be a joke in the US when I was there, which says, when does a liberal judge become a conservative judge? And they say, when his house gets burgled. Then all of a sudden, you know, now he sees what other people see, why, you know, they are saying they hard on criminals. It's a good question you have raised. The Russian-Ukrainian war is throwing out or is throwing up legal challenges on international economic relations, because I suspect that the doctrine of necessity, if well argued, may actually be one that international tribunals will have to embrace to defend or to uphold and sustain some of these sanctions, in the sense that countries could not just fold their hands and do nothing when Russia or any other country for that matter is busy perpetrating these evil and criminal activities. There has to be a reaction. There has to be a punishment. And that doctrine of necessity, or else the whole world will simply become the Hobbesian, you know, state of anarchy, where there will be no law and order. If there isn't, you've got to create an essence so that countries just don't go around, you know, behaving like apes, you know, in the forest. But it's then going to be interesting. It's going to make international law more exciting for the next generation of students. And their teachers would then have to be thinking on their feet. Not a question of now regurgitating issues determined by the Nuremberg trials. This has now gone beyond the Nuremberg syndrome, and we will just then have to see how they may need to set up new institutions. We discussed that the ICC or the World Court may not be actually designed to cope with the issues thrown up by what Medvedev was referring to. They will set up new institutions. I mean, we are clever when it comes to that, and we will move on.
Thank you very much, sir. We have run out of time this evening, and to our viewers, thank you very much. Please do remember, if you have not hit that subscribe or like button, please do so. So next time, once we go live, you get the notification. And please feel free to share the link as well when you get the link. Thank you very much, sir, for being here again this evening. And we shall be back next week. Good night, sir. Good night to our viewers. See you next week.